Welcome back to the Whispering Hour, where the world sleeps, and stories wake. Before tonight's tale begins, don't forget to like the video, comment where you're watching from, and tell us what kind of stories you would love to hear next. And subscribe, so you'll be here when the next story wakes. Now, let's begin. I've worked night shifts at the airport long enough to learn the building's secret rhythms. There's a difference between noise and life. Daytime is noisy and full of life, night is quiet but alive in a different way. When the crowds leave the terminals, the place settles into a stillness that feels less empty and more patient, like a room full of people holding their breath until morning. Gate 12 was the kind of place that held that patience particularly well. It sits at the far end of the concourse, glass walls looking out over the runway, rows of identical seats, and a small, slightly battered service desk. During the day it's a bland corner of the terminal. After midnight it becomes an altar for stories, the kind of spot where someone could wait for a promise for years and the walls wouldn't judge them for it. That night started ordinary. I finished the shift handoff with a mug of coffee that had been brewing since 11, took the keys to my patrol cart, and checked the schedule. The last flight had left at midnight, the terminal had been cleared twice by security, and the duty roster showed no arrivals until morning. I like those slow hours, the ones when you can hear the building itself settling and remember why you took this job. The quiet gives you room to think and to notice things other people don't. I had been walking the concourse for about 15 minutes when the lights near gate 12 flickered once, like a tired eyelid, and I slowed down without deciding to. I saw her before she saw me. She was sitting in the second row of seats by the window, a long black coat wrapped around her. Her hair was pulled back into a low bun and there was a small, neat handbag on the seat next to her. She held herself the way people hold themselves when they have been practicing stillness for a long time, straight back, hands crossed over one another, feet planted. Not reading, not on a phone, not even looking at the screens. She was staring at the runway like it was a movie she had watched 100 times and still expected to end differently. For a moment I thought she was a mannequin left by a display crew, all the more convincing because she was so absolutely still. Then I noticed the way the light caught the edge of her coat and felt the certainty in my chest that something about this was wrong. I walked up to her slowly, calling out in the usual neutral tone. "Ma'am, the terminal is closed. Can I help you?" Her body didn't respond. Her face didn't move. That hush was different from the practiced silence of a sleeping person, it had an old, patient weight to it. I took another step and cleared my throat, a little louder this time. She turned her head, slowly enough to read like someone pretending that time itself was moving carefully to avoid waking something. When she finally gave me her face, I remember thinking how ordinary she looked, which is what made it worse. There was no makeup smudged, no tear tracks, her coat wasn't wet, but her eyes were red in a way that said she had been crying for hours without the tears ever making a mark on her skin. "He's late," she said before I could speak, and the voice came out like a memory being spoken aloud. It was calm, not angry, not hysterical, only the faintest edge of something that had been waiting. "Which flight?" I asked, because on regular nights that's what you ask. People expect practical help and you offer it. There shouldn't be anyone past security right now. She didn't answer my question. Instead she raised one hand and pointed toward the runway, past the glass and the blinking lights. Following her finger, I felt the air change. The glass beyond her reflected the amber runway lights and, at the far horizon, a darkness that felt too dense for an empty tarmac. There was a shape moving there. At first I thought it was a maintenance worker, but then I realized there were no vehicles, no reflective vests, nothing that would allow someone to be out there without a reason. The shape moved with a slow, deliberate pace, always just outside the light's edge. It walked in a long, patient line as if it were following something only it could see. I put my hand on the back of one of the seats to steady myself and reached for the radio at my hip, keeping my voice steady for control. "Control, gate 12, do we have anyone on the runway perimeter?" Static answered first, then a clipped voice, "Negative. No personnel logged." "Why?" I swallowed the answer, because I didn't know how to explain a silhouette that might have been a trick of light, a shadow, a trick of my own eyes. The woman watched the runway like a person watching for a train that never arrives. She said softly, "He said 3. I asked who. She looked at me as if the question itself was proof that meaning had been forgotten. He said he would be back. Her lips were the smallest movement. The air around her seemed to contract as if whatever she expected had a presence that crowded the space. 100 questions tried to rise in me. Was she a widow, waiting for someone lost? Was she an elderly mother clinging to a promise that would never be kept? The story came to me in pieces like that: news footage, rumors in the break room, the way the airport nullifies things into size, until the pieces formed something too specific to ignore. There had been an accident years ago, a domestic flight that never made it. Nobody in official channels talked about it much because talking had legal consequences and grief gets classified as a liability. But there were whispers, small circles of staff who remembered the night like a bruise, a plane too low, a storm the reports minimized, a family that never left a terminal because they had nowhere else to go. Which crash? I asked because the word had slipped into my mouth before my mind caught up with it. She blinked and the whites of her eyes looked raw. The one they buried, she said. They said nothing survived. But he promised. The word, he, landed in the terminal like a shiver. Her hands were steady when they settled against the glass. I watched the condensation form, not from anyone inside the terminal but from something pressing near the outside surface. The glass fogged as if someone warm was breathing against it from the other side. I remember feeling very small, a man in a fluorescent-lit corridor trying to make sense of the impossible, because to my left and right the airport went on behaving as if nothing had changed, a janitor pushing a cart somewhere in the distance, a cleaning light blinking on a moving trolley, the distant hum of a generator that kept the emergency signage faintly lit. I moved closer and placed my palm on the window beside her hand, and the temperature on the other side gave a soft, almost animal warmth. The shape out on the runway had stopped. If anything, it had leaned even closer to the glass. It did not have a face to read, only suggestion, an outline that absorbed the light instead of reflecting it. The radio on my belt crackled again, and a voice I knew told me to report any irregularities and maintain distance, but by then my legs did not feel like mine. I wanted to pull her away, escort her to the security office, tell her about taxis and lost and found, the scripts we used to hold the night together. When I reached to gently touch her elbow, she did not resist. She stayed perfectly composed, and when she finally spoke, there was a small, sad smile like someone relieved by arrival and by resignation at once. "He came back for me," she said, and when she said it the glass shivered just a hair's breadth and then cracked, a single hairline seam that ran from the bottom corner like a tear. My radio screamed with a burst of static at once, and every screen at the control console 3 corridors over brightened as if someone had turned up the contrast on the night. Somewhere in the building a speaker picked up an automated alert and spat it out in a dead monotone, "Abnormal vibration detected at gate 12. The words felt wrong next to how quietly the woman stood. Without thinking, I grabbed her shoulder. The skin of her wrist was warm, not hot but warm enough to remember later. "Ma'am, please step away from the window for your safety," I said, keeping my voice level. She turned her head to look at me fully, and for the first time I saw the nothing in her gaze. Her pupils were normal, it wasn't that. It was like when you look at someone who has been somewhere the rest of you cannot follow, like there was an interior so large and full of sorrow that her exterior was acting as a thin membrane. The crack in the glass widened in slow, graceful strokes. It wasn't violent, not loud or splintering, but deliberate, like someone running a finger across the edge of a wound. There was a pressure, a subtle force that pushed at us, and then the man-shaped shadow at the glass seemed to bow, if a shadow can bow. He leaned in and the entire air in the terminal tightened like a bowstring. He said she boarded. I heard the voice, low and cold, as if someone had spoken right against my shoulder. I spun around. There was no one behind me, only the rows of seats and the business class desk, empty as a clinic after hours. Whatever the voice was, it came from the glass where the shadow had leaned, as if the runway itself had lungs and the sky had teeth. The woman's lips moved in answer, and I knew she was saying something, prayers, blessings, words I could not hear, and then suddenly the emergency lights managed a stammering flicker and everything went black. In that blackout the world narrowed to the smell. I could smell burnt paper and something metallic, and underneath that an old, deep, river-quiet smell that I learned later is what people who work planes call ozone and oil and a final hotness. I heard the faintest scuff of something along metal, like shoes on the landing strip, and then a breath directly in my ear that tasted of smoke. I grabbed for the woman's arm to keep her upright with both hands and felt it fall through air like a palm slipping between sheets. When the lights snapped back on, she was gone. There was no chair unmoored, no open door, no other visible trace. The crack in the window curved like a silver river. I walked over to it and laid my hand against the glass where the woman had stood and felt nothing more than normal cold. There was no heat imprint, no lingering residue, no fingerprints to speak of. The cleaning crew arrived within minutes after a hurried call to the duty manager, and when the supervisor and security came, they looked at the cracked glass with the professional distance of people framing their feelings in reports. Probably thermal stress, one said, because a report needs a cause. I watched him hold a flashlight like a priest with a candle and watched as he spoke the words people want to hear when facing the unexplainable. Yet his shadow paused at the edge where the man-shaped darkness had been, as if even the cold calculus of policy recognized that not everything would be neat. We reviewed the CCTV footage. The camera angle that covered Gate 12 showed me approaching, talking into the air, the woman's profile reflected as a small smear in the glass. For 30 seconds the frame held an unremarkable scene, an empty terminal with a man standing in the aisle. Then for a single half-second the image caught what we thought might be a shape, a smear of darkness that was barely resolvable, and then the frame went slightly fuzzy. The glitch lasted a blink and then the footage resumed like a movie edited with a mistake. "You should have stayed in the office, Marcus," said Anna from control, and the wear in her voice was not surprise but a kind of tired sorrow that I'd heard on the worst nights. Guards can be superstitious because superstition is a way to name the unknown. We have names for things that let us sleep. That night the vocabulary we knew failed us. When I tried to file an incident report we were instructed to log the broken glass, to note that an unknown person had been present. They emphasized we must not speculate in a formal report. Months passed. Airline crews rotate, managers change, and new shifts take over desks. The story of the woman who waited at Gate 12 found itself retold, somewhat flattened each time, until it steadied into history. For me, the memory hardened into something that feels less like proof and more like a knot I carry. There were nights when the terminal's lights pulsed a little too strongly and I would stand at Gate 12, not because I expected the impossible to replay, but because I could not leave a question unanswered that my nights had been quietly shaped around. I found myself checking manifest lists, reading archived reports marked with cautious phrases like "unusual report," feeling the way a diver reads the surface of the sea. Each time I scanned the old passenger lists I came back to the same name, on a list for the flight that never made it, like a bruise under paper. And then, one night, the public address system hiccuped with a timbre that felt familiar. "Final boarding call for AR 407, it whispered through the hushed concourse. The flight number felt like an echo of an old hurt. I watched the gate monitor and half expected to see the automatic doors open. They did not. I watched the glass where the woman had stood and told myself the rational things people tell themselves to stay anchored, that the mind makes patterns where none exist, that grief writes itself into the corners of public places. And yet the hairs on my forearms lifted, because sometimes the world speaks with both logic and something else, and both must be listened to. If there is a moral to the story, it's not about proof. It's about the way places carry people and the way promises live longer than the bodies that make them. Airports are organized chaos with schedules that pretend to order fate. But fate doesn't respect timetables, and promises don't obey closure. People promise to come back. Planes promise to carry us away. Machines promise to be predictable. On nights when the terminals hold their breath, you learn that promises can be kept in ways you cannot account for. I went back to the control room after that announcement and found the manifest for AR 407 open on the screen. The log timestamp read as if a line had been placed there just now, an entry that shouldn't exist in today's schedules. The staff in control looked at me with the same tired, solemn face Anna had given when she told me to log the incident. They had a slow acceptance that this place is full of more than maps and gates. We locked the file and put the footage aside. Reports were filed. The airport continued to operate. People arrived and left, and sometimes we heard stories of loved ones who had come back in small, inexplicable ways. I never saw the woman again. I never learned her name. Occasionally a traveler would stop at Gate 12 and talk for a moment about missing someone or waiting for a delayed call, and for a second you could mistake the way those conversations lined up with truth and myth. There are stretches of nights when the runway glows like a soft promise and the lights wink and the tarmac looks like the skin of something sleeping. There are other nights when you hear the whisper of something at the glass and you learn to listen in the right way, to let the story say what it needs to say and then hold it like a fragile object. The last thing I remember from that night was not the crack or the vanish or the announcements. It was the whisper that came after, like someone sealing an old letter with a final word: she boarded. It was a simple phrase, and in the quiet of Gate 12 it felt like an answer and an ending at once. I still walk the concourse, I still check the windows, and if the runway seems to hold a memory I listen to it. People who work night shifts learn how to keep two kinds of truth alive: the truth that pays salaries and the truth that keeps watch over promises no paperwork can hold. On some nights, they match, on others, they do not. I've worked night shifts long enough to know when someone doesn't belong in the terminal. The airport has its own rhythm, a quiet pulse that runs beneath the glow of fluorescent lights. After midnight, the whole place settles into a steady hum, like a sleeping creature that only opens one eye at a time. You can hear things in that silence: cleaners rolling their carts, security keys jingling, the faint echo of the last announcement hours after the speakers go quiet. Nothing surprises you after a few years. Nothing feels out of place. Until something does. It was around 2:30 in the morning when I saw him, standing at my empty check-in counter with a posture so still it took me a moment to understand he was real. I had been reviewing the manifest for the morning flights, sipping a cup of coffee that had gone cold 2 hours earlier, when I lifted my head and found a man watching me with a soft, patient expression. There was no sound of footsteps, no rustle of clothing, no rolling suitcase. One moment the walkway was empty, the next he was standing there like he had always been part of the quiet. He placed his passport gently on the counter. "Good evening," he said, as if the clock didn't disagree. "I'd like to check in for my flight." His voice was steady, polite, and so calm it didn't match the air around him. There's a kind of calm that comes from experience, another that comes from exhaustion, and one that comes from not belonging to the moment you're standing in. His was the third kind. I typed his name into the system. Daniel Mercer. I typed the flight number. AR-407. The system blinked. The cursor froze. A small red icon flashed at the corner of the screen like a warning trying to be discreet. AR-407 wasn't a normal flight anymore. It had crashed earlier that evening. Not delayed, not diverted, crashed. Dozens of people had been in emergency meetings since the news broke. Some passengers screamed, some cried, some refused to believe the departure boards. A few had to be escorted out because they insisted the boards must be wrong. Little groups gathered in corners, talking in tight whispers about relatives, weather, possibilities, and faith. Everyone was shaken. Everyone was grieving someone. But the man standing in front of me, Daniel Mercer, was on the passenger list. And he wasn't supposed to be alive. "I'm sorry," I said, clearing my throat. "Are you sure this is your flight?" He smiled kindly, as if I were the confused one. "Yes, of course. I was delayed. But I made it in time." His appearance made even less sense the longer I looked at him. His clothes were clean, but old-fashioned. The kind of jacket men wore in pictures from 10 or 15 years ago. His shoes were scuffed but dry, even though the floor around him reflected the shine of a recent cleaning. His hair was damp at the edges like he had walked through rain, even though it hadn't rained in days. "Where are you coming from?" I asked. He looked toward the runway, his eyes following some invisible line. "Someplace far. I don't remember how long the road was." But I knew I had to be here. I glanced at the plastic ID sleeve on his passport. It was clean. Too clean. A little too stiff. As if it hadn't been touched in years. "Sir," I said cautiously, "do you have any luggage with you?" He looked at me with an expression that made my stomach tighten. "I left it behind." "Where exactly?" "Everywhere." That was when I smelled it. A light, strange scent, not alcohol, not cologne, not sweat. Smoke, burnt metal, wet soil. It was faint, but unmistakable. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I checked the system again. The passenger manifest refreshed. Mercer, Daniel, status, deceased, pending confirmation. I felt a tremor move down my spine. My throat tightened. I looked up at him again. He was still smiling softly, waiting like a man used to lines and delays. "Sir," I whispered, "what happened to you?" He tilted his head. "Nothing unusual, just a little turbulence." I wanted to push my chair back, call security, step away, something, but the airport has strange rules at night. You follow procedures because they keep you sane. "Just 1 minute," I said. "I need to confirm some details." The radio at my hip suddenly buzzed with static, but no voice came through. The intercom above flickered, just once, like a breath being held. And then the speakers crackled to life. "Final boarding call for flight AR-407. All remaining passengers, please proceed to your gate." The voice was calm, automated, cold. My heart hammered. That flight wasn't real anymore. It didn't exist. No one should have been able to trigger that announcement. The man's eyes brightened slightly. "That's my boarding call." I swallowed hard. "Sir, that flight crashed." His expression softened, "I know." I stared at him, waiting for the part where he'd laugh, correct himself, explain that he meant some other flight, anything. But he only continued speaking in that calm, gentle tone. "I wasn't supposed to wake up," he said. "But when I did, I was alone. Everything was quiet. Everything was wrong. I kept calling out. No one answered." He looked at his hands. I wasn't sure if I had survived. But something kept pulling me here. His voice quivered, but his face didn't show fear, only confusion. A deep, old confusion. "I need to get home," he whispered. "I think someone's waiting for me." I forced myself to breathe. "Where is home?" He blinked slowly. "I don't remember." The runway lights outside flickered. The boarding door light at gate 14 turned on by itself. The monitors, all of them, updated simultaneously. AR-407, boarding now. The system wasn't glitching. It was working like the flight was real. He took a step back from the counter. "Thank you for helping me. I know you were trying to understand. Most don't try." "Sir, please wait," I started, panic rising in my voice. He paused. "Will you tell them I tried to come back? If they ever ask." "Who?" He gave a small, sad smile. "Anyone who loved me." He turned and walked toward gate 14, taking slow, deliberate steps. His shoes made no sound. His silhouette looked strangely thin, like the edges of him weren't fully solid. The closer he got to the gate, the more the air thickened. "Sir." I called out again, but my voice felt swallowed by the terminal. He reached the boarding door. The light above it flickered once, twice. Then the door slid open. There was no walkway attached. No aircraft outside. Just the darkness of the tarmac. A wind pushed into the terminal, cold enough to raise goosebumps along my arms. He stepped forward into it. For a moment. Just a moment. I swear I saw the outline of a plane beyond the glass. Not real metal, not real light. Just a suggestion of shape, like a memory wearing the skin of an aircraft. He walked into that darkness as if walking down an aisle. And then, he was gone. The gate door slid shut. The lights normalized. The monitors blinked. AR-407, closed. I stood frozen, unable to move or breathe. My radio buzzed violently at my hip. When I finally lifted it, a voice from control rattled out, "Check-in 3, why did you trigger the AR-407 announcement? That flight is not active. Report immediately." "I didn't trigger anything," I said, my voice shaking. "They demanded I come upstairs." But before I left the counter, something caught my eye. The man's passport, still on the desk. I picked it up gently, almost afraid it would burn me. Inside, the photo matched him exactly, eyes, hair, jawline. But the document had a stamp. Deceased. Date, 11 years ago. My breath caught in my throat. I checked the CCTV footage with security. The recording showed me standing there, talking, typing, panicking. But the counter in front of me, empty. Just me, talking to air. Except for one frame. A single second where the footage glitched enough to let something through. A shape, a man-shaped blur. Leaning over the counter like someone exhausted. And behind him, reflected in the glass, the outline of a burning plane. Security told me it was a glitch. IT told me it was compression artifacts. Management told me to file a minimal report. I filed it. But every night since then, when the terminal empties and the runway lights hum like a distant lullaby, I swear I hear footsteps behind me, soft, hesitant, searching footsteps. Always stopping at my counter. Always waiting for a boarding call that should never exist. And sometimes, when I walk past gate 14 after 3 a.m., the light above the boarding door flickers on for a moment, and the intercom whispers the same call. Passenger Daniel Mercer, final boarding. I've worked baggage services at the airport long enough to know what people will and will not pack when they leave. There's an unspoken grammar to it: the heavier the suitcase, the more carefully you slip things in, the lighter it is, the more hurried the exit. Luggage carries secrets, tickets, receipts, half-written notes, the weight of someone's intention to return. I'd seen every type of bag: neat suitcases with careful labels, backpacks stuffed without thought, duffels that smelled like someone was trying to smell like home. None of those bags frightened me. They were honest things. The night the blue suitcase appeared, everything I thought I knew about luggage stopped being useful. It began like most slow nights begin, with the hum of machinery and the small, steady tasks that make up the hours. The lights above the belt room were dimmed to a low, steady glow, the monitors lined up like sleepy eyes scanning their assigned strips of conveyor. I was finishing the shift report, correcting entries from earlier handoffs, when camera 5 caught my attention. At first I thought it was a delayed feed, a glitch. The screen showed the belt empty, then a suitcase came into frame and rolled slowly, soaked as if dipped in seawater. The tag was blurred with salt stains. I rubbed my eyes, because sometimes exhaustion makes pixels betray you, but the suitcase kept moving in the recorded feed while the live view on camera 1 stubbornly showed nothing. Two realities in the same room, and neither one explained why something that shouldn't exist was on the belt. I grabbed my radio and walked the corridor to the belt room, the echo of my boots following me like a question. The hallway smelled faintly of oil and lemon cleaner, the building smelled like that always after midnight, steady and familiar. When I pushed open the belt room door, the belts were still. The lights were low. Empty. My hand brushed the metal frame of the door because habit tells you to check your grip, and when I switched the live camera to the belt-level view, there it was again, the dark blue suitcase, rolling in as if gravity had decided to place it there for me to find. Object in the camera, absence in the room. It was the kind of contradiction that sits on your chest if you stare at it too long. Then the belt made a single rattle behind me, quick, mechanical, as if something had activated. I turned and the suitcase was on the conveyor, right where the camera had shown it, soaking wet, condensation tracing little rivers on its surface. I have no neat explanation for the way my stomach folded when I reached to touch it. It felt cold, not the clean cold of refrigerated metal but the mean, dense cold of deep water. There was no staff in sight, no maintenance team, nothing to account for the bag's arrival. It had simply appeared where there had been nothing seconds before. The tag was taped on roughly. The name printed in a font worn by travel, Reyes, Martin. The name hit me because 3 years before we'd lost Flight 172 off the coast, debris had washed up for weeks, and the airport had handled the aftermath in that professional, flattened way institutions have for grief, with forms and counselors and a wrap-up meeting that ended with a slide labeled, "Closure." Martin Reyes was on the manifest that night. I remembered his name because people remember things like a stone, certain and small. I pulled the tag closer. The paper was saturated and the ink smeared at the corner, the scrawl where someone might have written a phone number was ruined by salt. I reached to unzip the case because part of me was still on autopilot, the part trained to inspect, to verify, to catalog. My fingers met fabric and metal and a cold that went through glove and skin both. The zipper faltered, as if something inside was resisting. I hesitated, then lifted the lid an inch, only to feel the air change as if a breath had been released. Inside were clothes folded with care, a pair of shoes, a wet paperback novel with the spine softened by water. Everything was ordinary and empty in the way ordinary things are honest until they are not. Tucked inside a pocket, beneath shirt fabric, was a photograph that made the room tilt, a man with a wide smile standing between a woman and a small boy, their arms around each other like a promise. The back of the photo had a stamp from the check-in counter, faded but recognizable. Someone had died carrying those clothes. Someone's life had ended and the thing they'd loved enough to pack had come back alone. For a long second I simply held the photograph between 2 fingers, and the image blurred in the real light as if the salt from the suitcase had already started to erase edges. I set everything down carefully. The belts hummed again without explanation, the machinery waking as if called to attention. Then another suitcase rolled into view, brown and battered, its tag eaten by water, and then another, and another. It was like watching an ocean deposit pieces of a life onto a beach. The radio in my hand hissed with static and then, faintly, a voice, "Belt room, do you copy?" I answered. The voice on the other end was clipped, businesslike, someone in control repeating the script that keeps us from falling apart. I told them I had luggage on Belt 3, that no flights were active, that the feeds were inconsistent. They told me to hold and that a supervisor was en route. I walked to the far end of the belt and found water on the floor, a thin ribbon that trailed away toward the exit like someone had forgotten to wipe a footprint. It led to a corridor of dim maintenance lights, and beyond that to the glass doors that faced the quiet lot. Standing there, silhouetted against the reflection of the tarmac lights, was a man. He was soaked, clothes clinging to him. He didn't have the panicked look you expect from someone who's run, he looked, instead, like someone who had been walking a long road to arrive at a single door. When he turned, the light hit his face, and for a moment I recognized the outline, the tilt of his jaw. But his skin was pale in a way that made him seem thin and distant, as if light traveled through him rather than bathed him. That old, small recognition, Reyes, rose in the back of my mind and then folded away. I was a professional on duty. Professionals do not mourn while the tape is still running. We note, we record, we file. He didn't speak at first. He only stood there, his shoulders moving with the effort to breathe in an environment that felt alien to him. I called out, "Sir. You need assistance." My voice sounded too loud in the empty stretch. He blinked, as though waking because he hadn't known he'd fallen asleep. "My family," he asked simply, and the question, stripped to its core, landed like a stone. "Is my family here?" I didn't have an answer. I had forms, I had channels, I had procedures. I had a list that said they were missing and a search that ended in blueprints and ocean grids. I had no sense for the kind of arithmetic grief uses. "I don't know," I said, and it felt like a betrayal. He nodded slowly, like that's what he expected. There was something in his face that broke me, no anger, no pleading, just a tiredness that used up the rest of the world. With a movement that was casual and deliberate, he took a small step forward. Then the outer door to the tarmac opened with the mechanized sigh that always sounds too loud at night. A wind came through, the smell of salt and machine and something like iron. He walked into that wind and the air folded around him like a page turning. It literally happened in a way my rational mind resisted describing. He did not so much walk as dissolve into the threshold, and for a second I could see the reflection of a plane on the wet tarmac, the suggestion of wings where there were none. Then the outer light blinked, the door closed on a whisper, and he was simply not there. The only thing left was a wet trail on the floor leading back to the belt room and the photograph I had placed on top of a suitcase. When I told the supervisor what I'd witnessed, she did the thing supervisors do, called security, looped in the on-call manager, instructed us to log everything and to try to preserve the scene. They reviewed footage. The cameras recorded the belts coming to life, the metadata showed an activation time. But when they scrubbed through footage of the corridor, there was nothing, no man, no water, only a reflection that some software artifact could not explain. In the official report, the logs registered one anomaly and one recovered item. The computer system showed a retrieval code, retrieved. No explanation. Management closed the case with a neutral sentence and an order to move on, because businesses move on by design. The thing is, you can chain people to policy and paperwork, but you can't chain a memory. For days after, we found items. Not a flood, more like the sea picking at a beach and leaving scatterings, a shoe with a frayed lace, a crumpled boarding pass that no algorithm could tie to a passenger due to water damage, a child's toy. Every object carried the smell of wet salt. People who had worked that crash remember such things, and those memories converge into a grainy mosaic. Some nights, in the quiet after midnight when I'm alone watching the screens, a belt will make a noise and my hands will remember what it felt like to unzip that blue case and pick up the photograph. I find myself checking manifests for names that hurt, names that technologies mark as closed. I also find myself listening for softer signs, the catch in a hallway speaker, a static whisper on the radio that nobody else seems to hear. In the aftermath, we become listeners by necessity. Months later, an update came through the notifications board. A line changed on the recovered passenger list. It read, Reyes, Martin, status, retrieved. Not identified, not found, retrieved. There's a difference between retrieving an object and being able to lay it down. The word felt like a gentle, bureaucratic attempt at closure. To me it read differently, someone been taken from that long list and placed somewhere they could be marked in our system. When the paperwork is done and the forms are filed, people will go home to sleep and the airport will continue to run on its own rhythms. But there are nights when the belts will wake and cough up a small part of a life, and you will stand there and know things you can't report without sounding like a person who's lost too much sleep. Sometimes, on the late shift, I listen to the belts. Machines have a voice if you know how to hear it. There's a tone they make when things are as they should be and an off-key note when they're not. That night the belts sang a song I'd never heard, soft, like fabric being dragged across wood. Years after I first held that photograph, I keep a copy folded inside my locker. It has faded, the colors bleeding into gray, but the smiles are still visible. When things get quiet, I take it out and look at the faces, and I think about how objects find their way back to places that remember. Luggage tells stories, yes, but sometimes the stories are not about movement from one destination to another, sometimes they are about a place that keeps its own ledger of promises and returns what it can when the night is patient. There is no tidy lesson here. The airport did its job the way institutions do, it logged, it reported, it archived. Families were notified through the proper channels, investigators did what they needed to close a file, and the machines continued to hum. But for those of us who spend nights listening to belts and lights, closure is not a line in a report. Closure is the feeling of a zipper moving in a silent room, the soft slap of water on polished tile, the way a photograph begins to blur in the edges when you spend too many nights relooking. People will always ask for an explanation and the explanation will be logistics or electrical surges or a storm that brought in humidity. Those answers matter to committees and insurers. For the rest of us, the truth is smaller, less marketable. Sometimes things come home on their own, and sometimes when they do, someone is waiting at the threshold for them. I'd always thought the security checkpoint was the safest place in the airport. Bright lights, officers watching every angle, cameras positioned like unblinking eyes. No shadows, no corners, no excuses. Everything was clear, controlled, predictable. Or at least it used to be, until the night one passenger walked in without passing through any entrance, stood silently at lane 4, and changed my idea of what a boundary really is. I was working the late shift again, the one where the lines disappear and you finally hear the building breathe. Security at night is less about crowds and more about routines, testing wands, checking belt motors, logging the number of trays we lose to forgetful passengers. The fluorescent lights overhead were steady, almost too steady, and the silence made every movement sound louder. I was scanning the metal detector reports, looking for anomalies from the day shift, when one appeared in real time, object detected, no entry recorded. The system didn't glitch often, so when it did, you paid attention. I raised my head to look at lane 4. It was empty. The belts were off. The monitor still showed no one approaching. But the detection indicator blinked steadily, like something had crossed the threshold. I set the tablet down and walked toward the lane, the quiet making my footsteps sound heavier than they were. When I reached the metal detector, the air felt colder, as if someone had opened a freezer door. I checked the belt sensors manually, and that's when a shape moved at the edge of my vision. A man stood at the end of the conveyor belt, right where passengers usually collect their trays. I hadn't heard him approach. I hadn't seen him on any camera feed. He was simply there, hands folded in front of him, head lowered slightly as if he were waiting for permission to move. His clothes were wrong for the season, an overcoat too heavy for the warm night and a hat that seemed out of place under airport lights. For a moment I thought he was a traveler who'd wandered in from the curb, disoriented or lost. But his shoes were dripping water. A small detail, but wrong enough to make the rest of the scene feel off balance. "Sir, this area is closed," I said, approaching cautiously. He didn't look up immediately. When he finally did, his face was pale, stretched, and beneath his eyes were the kind of dark circles you only see on people who haven't slept in a very long time. He spoke quietly, almost apologetically. "I'm looking for my wife." The sentence came out steady, but the tone carried something cold underneath it. Not fear. Not confusion. Something else. Something too quiet. I asked if he needed assistance, if he was lost, if he'd been separated from someone on a flight. His eyes drifted toward the metal detector, then toward the exit lane, as though he was trying to remember which direction he had come from. "She was behind me," he said softly. I looked away, and, he paused, jaw tightening like someone holding back a truth he wasn't sure he believed himself. "She never came through." I checked the monitors again. No one matching his description had been logged in the past hour. No companion listed. No flight arrival that fit. And still, water made a small pool beneath his shoes, gathering slowly, as if he'd walked through something deeper than a simple puddle outside. I called for another officer to join me, but the line crackled with static, the kind that makes voices bend and stretch. I could almost hear words in the interference, but nothing clear enough to understand. The man stepped closer to the metal detector, and the sensor lit up as if something heavy had passed through. But he wasn't carrying anything. No luggage, no bag, not even a boarding pass in his hand. The system beeped again, a sharp, uneasy sound. I stopped him gently with a hand on his arm, and the moment I touched him, a coldness went straight through the fabric, through my skin, like the shock of stepping into cold ocean water. He looked at me, startled, not at the touch, but at the way I seemed to react to it. "She's waiting for me," he said. "I need to catch up." His voice was steady, but wrong in a way I couldn't explain. It felt like he was speaking from a great distance, like the words had to travel too long a road to reach his mouth. I radioed again for backup, louder this time, but the static only deepened. The man gave me an apologetic half-smile, as if he was sorry to inconvenience me. "She wouldn't have left me," he murmured. "I just missed my step." "But she wouldn't leave." He turned abruptly toward the metal detector, stepping through before I could stop him. The sensor lit up violently, alarm blaring as though something massive had crossed the threshold. I reached for him, but the lights above flickered, the siren stuttered, and for one long, disorienting moment everything in the lane blurred, like heat rising from asphalt. When the lights steadied again, he was gone. Not walked around me. Not run down the lane. Gone, like the frame had jumped, like the system had hiccuped and deleted a second of footage. The alarms died slowly, as if choking on their own echo. I ran down the corridor toward the exit lanes, scanning every corner, every camera, every reflection in the polished floor. Nothing, there was no splash of water, no footprints, no trace of the man or his strange, fog-soaked coat. Security arrived minutes later, confused, irritated, certain that I'd misread something. They pulled the footage. They scrubbed the logs. The camera feed showed an empty lane, no alarms, no man. Only the sensor activation, a single flash of data with no matching body in frame. Glitch, they said. System drift. I'd been tired, they claimed. I'd misinterpreted the data. Protocols were updated anyway, because airports pretend logic can solve every mystery. 2 days later another alert popped up, unauthorized entry, lane 4. I checked the feed out of instinct, expecting nothing. But in the corner of the frame, for less than a second, a shape stood near the metal detector. A silhouette. Hat. Coat. Still dripping. And directly next to the metal detector, someone else appeared, just a blur at the edge, faint, like an image burned and fading. A second figure, smaller, a woman's height. The frame shifted, corrected itself, and both were gone. The sensor log read. 2 entries recorded, no exits, no cameras triggered. I reported it. They told me again it was a glitch. Systems do that. Logs get corrupted. Night plays tricks on the eyes. I stopped arguing. You can't convince people who have already decided the limits of their world. You can only keep watch over yours. Now when I work late shifts, I avoid lane 4. But sometimes I hear the metal detector give a soft, solitary click, the sound it makes when someone steps through. And there are nights I catch the faintest trace of water on the floor, shimmering under the fluorescent lights before it dries away, as if 2 passengers walked through together, holding hands, trying to keep a promise the living world forgot. I never used to think much about the janitorial staff at the airport. Not because they weren't important, they kept the whole place functioning, but because they moved like background rhythm. Quiet, reliable, faceless in the way night workers often become. The airport is a machine, and they're the gears that turn without complaint. But after what happened on my overnight shift last winter, I can't walk past a cleaning cart without remembering him. The man everyone assumed had resigned. The man who had, according to the record, clocked out 15 years ago. The man who, somehow, never left. It started on a night with low visibility warnings, the kind where fog rolls into the terminal glass like something alive. Flights were delayed. Then delayed again. Then cancelled. The passengers thinned until all that was left were scattered silhouettes curled in chairs, trying to sleep under fluorescent light. I was doing final rounds near Gate 61, checking power outlets and recording maintenance notes. The hallway was long and quiet, and the fog pressing on the windows made the entire concourse feel smaller, like the world outside had shrunk overnight. I had stopped beside a vending machine to record a service request when I noticed it, a small scrape on the floor. Not unusual by itself, but the scrape wasn't from luggage wheels. It was too thin, too controlled. I crouched to inspect it and realized it wasn't one mark, it was a long line, curved slightly, following the hallway. Like something dragged. Something long. Something steady. I followed the line to the left, passing 2 closed shops and a locked massage chair kiosk. The mark grew darker, like the drag had gotten heavier. When I turned the final corner, I saw someone standing at the end of the corridor, facing away from me. He held a broom in his hand. His posture was bent. His cap was low. He didn't sweep. He just stood there, as if listening for something I couldn't hear. When I took a step toward him, the air shifted. Not cold. Just, wrong. Too still. Too expectant. "Sir." I called out. He didn't turn. Instead, he began sweeping, slow, careful strokes that seemed to pull the sound out of the hallway. Each sweep left a faint wet sheen behind. Not puddles. Not spills. Just a thin trail of moisture, like something damp was being moved across the tiles. I took another step. "Are you assigned here tonight?" He stopped sweeping. For a long moment, he didn't move at all. Then, in a voice that sounded strained with exhaustion, he said, "You shouldn't be here. Not now." Those words froze me, not because of the warning, but the way he said them. Like he had said them many times before. Like he expected me to understand. "I'm maintenance," I replied cautiously. "Just doing my rounds." He turned his head slightly, but not enough for me to see his face. "Rounds mean nothing here after 3. It wasn't 3. It wasn't close to 3. It was 1:42 a.m. I checked my watch twice, uncertain whether I had misread something. But no, the numbers glowed confidently in the dim light. "Sir, do you need help? Are you injured?" I asked, taking a slow step forward. The man finally turned toward me. His uniform was the older model, the kind discontinued over a decade ago. His badge, though cracked and barely readable, still caught the light. Miguel Alvarez, Custodial Services. The name hit harder than I expected. I had seen it before, in an old internal report. A janitor who went missing after a late-night call to clean a spill in a secure area. He never logged out. 2 days later, management cleared his locker and marked him as resigned. Everyone forgot him, except the system. And now, apparently, me. His eyes met mine, dark, sunken, and filled with something I've never been able to describe. Not hostility. Not grief. Something quieter. Something tired. "You're still here," I whispered before I realized the words were leaving my mouth. He nodded once, slow and heavy. "I didn't finish." "Finish, what?" He lifted the broom slightly and gestured down the hallway. "The spill." "What spill?" "There's nothing there." He blinked, as if the world confused him. "Not for you." The lights overhead flickered in a ripple, like something passing above the wiring. In that brief stutter, his figure blurred. Not vanished. Just, slipped, like a reflection moving in water. I should have called for help. I should have stepped back. But something kept me rooted, something in the man's expression that felt like pleading. "What happened the night you went missing?" I asked quietly. His shoulders tightened. "Gate 16. That area's restricted. It's locked every night." "It wasn't locked that night," he said. "Someone called. Said there was a spill no one else wanted to handle. Said I was the only one on shift." "That call never showed in the logs," I said, remembering the report. He nodded, as if he expected that. "Logs change. Floors remember." Suddenly, the intercom above us let out a soft crackle. A faint voice whispered something unintelligible, no announcement, just breath drifting through the static. Miguel turned his head toward the ceiling slowly, listening the way you listen to someone calling your name from very far away. "It's time," he whispered. "For what?" I asked, pulse hammering in my throat. He pointed behind me. I turned. Gate 16, a gate that should have been 2 concourses away, was now at the end of the hallway, its digital sign flickering. That wasn't possible. There was no logical way it could be there. The airport wasn't built like that. The layout was fixed. Walls didn't move. Gates didn't teleport. But there it was, the faded numbers, the silent doors, the old scratched flooring that had been replaced years ago. Miguel began walking toward it. "Wait!" I called after him. He didn't pause. Don't follow, it's not your shift. I followed anyway. The hallway grew dim as I walked. The ceiling lights blinked in an irregular pattern, like something was interfering with the power grid. The air grew damp, and the tile beneath my shoes grew slick. I caught up to him near the gate. "What's in there?" I asked. He pressed his hand against the door. What was left behind? Suddenly, the door's glass clouded, not from heat, but from condensation. Something moved behind it, a blur, a silhouette pacing back and forth. My heart kicked hard against my ribs. "Someone inside?" I whispered. Miguel didn't answer. He simply pushed the door open. A cold wave of air rolled out. Inside the gate area, the lights were flickering faintly, casting long shadows across the empty chairs. The walls were speckled with moisture. In the far corner, something glistened, a puddle that stretched wider than it should have. Then I heard it. A dragging sound. Soft, slow, wet. Something inside the room moved toward us. Miguel stepped forward, raising the broom defensively, but not like a weapon, like a shield. "You're still cleaning," I whispered, understanding hitting me in a way I wasn't ready for. He nodded. I didn't finish. A figure emerged from the corner, blurred by the flickering lights, hunched, soaked, leaving long trails of water behind. It wasn't walking. It was trying to move the way a person does, but its joints bent wrong, its posture uneven. It reached for Miguel with a jerky motion. He stepped between me and the thing without hesitation. "You don't belong here," he told it calmly. "You were supposed to board." The figure twitched violently, like the word struck something in it. The lights surged, bright then dim, and the room seemed to fold around the movement. The thing recoiled from Miguel's presence, its water pooling backward toward the corner. Miguel took a breath, deep, steady, and stepped closer. "You missed your flight," he said. "Let me take care of it." The figure froze. Then slowly backed into the shadows and dissolved into the wet floor as though sinking into a deeper surface. The light steadied, the air warmed. Gate 16 looked normal again. Miguel lowered the broom. He looked exhausted, the kind of exhaustion that lives under someone's skin. "Why are you still here?" I asked quietly. He looked at his hands, dripping water that didn't belong in this world. "Someone has to clean what's left behind." "But you're not alive anymore," I whispered. He didn't flinch. "I know. What keeps you here?" He took a long breath, like gathering weight. "Responsibility." He handed me his badge. A janitor's badge, cracked, faded, burned on the edges. A badge that didn't belong to the living. "You should go," he said gently. "Your shift isn't here." "Where is yours?" I asked. He looked back at gate 16, his expression almost peaceful. "Finishing." Then the lights flickered once more. And Miguel stepped through the door. When the light steadied, he was gone. Only the broom remained on the floor, dry now, and the faint scent of wet concrete fading slowly, as though the building itself wanted to forget. The next morning, the maintenance system logged a completion entry. Shift completed, 3 a.m. Name, Miguel Alvarez. Status, active. 15 years after he disappeared. The airport doesn't release those who don't finish their shift. And some nights, when the floor is quiet enough, I still hear the gentle sweep of a broom far down the corridor, steady, calm, patient, as if someone is finally catching up on the work the living left behind. You have been listening to The Whispering Hour. Tonight's tale fades softly, leaving its last light in the quiet corners of your mind. Let the echoes settle. Let the darkness rest. Good night.